The definition of boundaries, one meaning is the emotional distance between you and another person. It can also actually be physical distance as well. You can probably feel when somebody's in your space, like if somebody gets too close to you, there's a certain social distance that we expect. And there's a certain emotional distance as well. So emotional distance is a lot of what we're talking about, but it can also be physical. And boundaries are a clear line between you and somebody else, protecting your feelings, your needs, your preferences, your values, your way of being. And generally, boundaries keep something in and they keep something out. So if you think of your skin as a boundary, it's keeping your organs and yourself, your being, inside your body. And it's also keeping other things out. It feels like a real violation when our boundaries are crossed. So boundaries can be emotional, they can be physical, they can be sound. Like if you have heard somebody going down the street in their car with their speakers really blaring, it's a violation of boundaries for everybody else that's on the road. It can be visual, really bright lights, seeing images that are offensive, and it can be smell. So going through a department store and having perfume sprayed on you. It's protecting your physical and psychological integrity. So the state of your being can be whole, can be entire, can be undiminished. Integrity also means that which it's protecting is unimpaired and in perfect condition, like a ship's hull. Like if the ship's hull is boundary crossed, the ship can sink. You're able to be the real you without being ridiculed, pressured by others. And that your preferences, beliefs, lifestyle, sexuality, idiosyncrasies, which make you a unique and autonomous, free individual, are honored. So when we don't have good boundaries, we might say yes when we mean no. We might be listening to more words than we want to hear. It can be speaking incessantly and never tossing the conversational ball to the other person. It can be giving unasked for advice. So if somebody's talking, we think we have a better idea than it's possible for them to think up. Solving problems that aren't yours to solve. So we talk about treating other people as if they're capable and letting them share with us without having a better idea. Having bad boundaries, it might give you a high tolerance for inappropriate behavior. You might be used to many years of people violating your boundaries or violating other people's boundaries without knowing it. And it feels kind of bad, but you're so used to it that you don't notice it. So good boundaries, you're able to say no whenever you feel so inclined. And I have an asterisk, keeping in mind your tone. It's not a hell no, it's a compassionate no. And you can figure out who actually owns the problem and let them solve it. Like, we don't think that every problem that occurs is ours to fix. And we try to stay out of the middle. Triangulation refers to three people trying to solve a problem, and we usually have a victim, a persecutor, and a rescuer. You can really play any part of that role, but often we get pulled in as the rescuer. So two people are having a disagreement, and either we pull ourselves in as the rescuer or someone pulls us in. So I'm saying here that if you have good boundaries, you can see situations, who's involved, whose problem it is to solve, and you let them solve it. And you have a sensitivity and awareness of what's right for you. So you're connected to your body sense of what feels right and good. If we're living from the head up and not connected to the body, we can't really feel when our boundaries are being violated or what feels right or what doesn't feel right, because we're just in our heads and we've not really connected that much to our felt sense. So with good boundaries, you can be yourself. You don't have to edit how you think and feel, what you say. You can interact with other people as an interdependent relationship of adult human beings who don't lose their personal identity, their uniqueness, or their autonomy. You're not over-functioning or under-functioning. You're really treating other people as capable and letting everyone do their thing. You expect other people to respect your boundaries, and you can speak up when your boundaries are being violated without shame. So a lot of times if we grew up in a family where our boundaries were not honored, it can feel, we're very easily shamed to protect our boundaries because that's what happened as children. So with good boundaries, you know what you need for your own physical and emotional well-being, and you can ask for it, as I said, without shame. You have your own opinions and are intimidated by other people's opinions. And it doesn't mean you're walking around with your fists out waiting for a fight, trying to convince everybody of your point of view. It means stating it in a calm way when it's appropriate. And, oftentimes not even stating it, don't even have to say anything. And that you allow other people to have their own differences, their own opinions. You can act and create in a unique and autonomous, idiosyncratic way, in other words, being you. And you're separate rather than enmeshed or dependent with other people. So you can really act as a separate person. You know what feelings are yours and what feelings are somebody else's. And when you're enmeshed, you can't tell that. You can't tell what feelings are yours and what are somebody else's. Families can be too close, too much togetherness, and it can feel intrusive. Everybody's all up in each other's business. There's a need for one to know everything, and that everyone must do everything together. Like if you want to opt out of a holiday or a birthday, it causes a big family crisis. In a enmeshed, too close family, everybody needs to think, feel, and act in the same way. You need to vote for the same political party. You need to be, in some cases, heterosexual. In some cases, the same religion. And anyone that acts differently becomes the black sheep. And also other people, and they're often cut off because anybody who agrees with the black sheep is also cut off. With too much togetherness, it's homogeneous. You can't deviate from the family norms. And when someone asks you to do something, you can't say no, but then you resent it when you say yes. So there's this kind of a family, there's always like an underlying anxiety because of all these rules that it doesn't feel quite right. And in a disengaged family where there's too much distance, it's every man for himself. It doesn't feel like you have any support. And the family members feel totally independent of one another. Nobody knows what anybody else is doing or care. It doesn't seem like they care what they're feeling or if they're having a hard time. There's no real empathy for each other and really very poor attachment. There's no little affiliation with each other because feelings are not part of the conversation. People don't talk about how they feel. In this case, they're living from the head up. In a disengaged family, the family often lacks a common purpose. They don't have a goal or rationale for existing together. It's just kind of like they fell in together by accident and they're sort of existing together. And they're alienated from the emotional life of oneself and also each other. So there's lots of alone time in this kind of a family. And it can feel very lonely, even though there's a lot of people around. There's a loneliness because you're not really feeling each other. You're not really connected. And there's a real fear of engulfment if someone does try to get into how you feel. So if you meet somebody from an enmeshed family, someone from a disengaged family meets somebody from an enmeshed family, the one from the disengaged family has a huge fear of engulfment, like to show your feelings or to acknowledge somebody else's feelings. It feels like you're going to be taken over because it just feels like too much. Boundary issues are sort of like the inability to protect your boundaries. So you might dissociate if you don't feel confident or don't know how to protect your boundaries. So you might blank out during a stressful emotional event. You might not remember what happened. You try to get problematic events or feelings to go away. So you might say, it doesn't matter, I can never win this battle. You sort of have this defeatist attitude and just trying to get the threat to go away. If you have allowed your boundaries to be perpetually violated, then you become a perpetual victim and you become overly defensive. You take on the victim role and you let others know frequently how much you're a martyr. And you can have a chip on your shoulder, sort of like repelling people. I dare you to come too close. And you might become invisible. So there's nobody really knows what you're thinking and you don't want them to. And they might not even be able to physically find you. Like you might be up in the attic looking at old photos, or down in the basement, or, so engrossed in TV all the time that nobody can really reach you. You might become aloof. So if your early attempts to relate to other people were rejected or ignored, then you kind of give up and just adopt this aloof personality. And it serves to keep others out so that they can't hurt you. They can't violate your boundaries, or they can't be too far away. Like you push them far away and at least it's under your own control. So you reject other people before they can reject you. So with healthy boundaries, there's interdependence. So everyone taking care of their share of the load of work according to their unique abilities. And there's an attitude of, I can live without you, but I love living with you. People are acting like grown adults that can survive on their own, but that life is better together. And with healthy boundaries, the system grants people privacy, the right to time alone, to private thoughts, to private feelings, to activities, and letting people have their own space. And these are diagrams of both enmeshed and distant systems, family systems. So if a family is too close or enmeshed, it's like people are almost like on top of each other. They're merged together, so they can't discern whose feelings are whose problem is whose. It's like if you're upset, I must be upset. I feel your pain as if it was mine. We demand that we see reality. We assume and project that we see a reality the same way because it's almost like we're the same person. And no, there's no space or permission for alone time. It's almost like joined at the hip. And too distant, people are asking what pain? If somebody has something going on, I don't see any pain. So it's every man for himself, every person for themselves. And there's a real impoverished emotional life and fluency. People don't know how they feel. They don't know how to talk about their feelings. And the conversation is limited to factual things or news items or things that are happening to other people, but nobody's really talking about how they're doing. So a healthy interdependent system, that there's overlap, but there's a lot of space. If these are two people, these circles that indicate two people, there's a lot of space that's outside of the overlapping life experience. So people can have different interests. They spend time outside of the relationship. They can share their feelings and needs. They can ask for what they want. And they can feel empathy for each other. And so be there for each other, but as a separate person. So how to begin setting healthy boundaries? So first you have to identify that your boundaries are being violated and how, which, as someone was saying in the intro, that it just seems so common. It's been going on so long that it wasn't even labeled as such. So really the best step is awareness, noticing. And then also identifying how you're violating the boundaries of others. It's probably not just going one way. It's almost always going both ways. So looking at what's the stressful thought underneath. Like if you said no, for example, do you fear that you'd be rejected? Do you say yes because you want to be approved of? Do you have shame over having any needs at all? Do you see other people as incapable, and so you're kind of like one up and everybody else is one down? They're a little bit less capable than you are. And that maybe you can be addicted to the role of helper or martyr or any role. Something that happens when people go into treatment is that the family left behind is sort of at a loss. Like they've lived their life so much in relation to the person who's using, that they kind of don't know what to do with themselves or their lives. that it's been happening for so many years that they don't know what else to do. It's very easy to get into this over time. So there's also a fear of confrontation. It's much easier not to rock the boat, and it's much easier not to say anything. I'll just go along to get along. One way that the living inquiries can really help with this, is once you identify that you're afraid, then you can do inquiry on what is the threat? How are you holding the threat in your consciousness? Do you have a picture of it? Do you have a recording? Did something happen before? What's running the stressful thought that makes you afraid to confront someone, or makes you afraid that you'll be rejected if you say no, or makes you feel shame over having needs? Like we have to sort of delve into the psyche and see what's the belief. It's not as easy as just changing behavior. If it were, that would be great. We just have to know these facts and then we could change. But there's really powerful beliefs and experiences that are running these things. We didn't just start doing them. There's a reason why we did it. Everything that's happened to us is sort of filed somewhere in the brain. When we start doing inquiry, we can open up minds of history and feelings and see what it is and undo what it is that's causing the beliefs. So why don't we all have healthy boundaries and just be who we are? Well, because there's a biological need, a biological imperative to be together. We want to stay close to each other to survive. And there's an equal and opposite individuation force, and that's the force to become your own self and not be engulfed or influenced by other people. And these two things are in constant tension. Once again, we have another presentation, and I always talk about differentiation in all of these presentations. The answer really to everything is becoming our own self without shame, addressing the fears that we have of being who we are. And I don't know if you have seen Billy Elliot, but it's a great movie about individuation, and he had the courage to go after what he really wanted to do, even in the face of everybody going against him and trying to shame him. What are we afraid of? We're afraid of rejection. We're afraid of being alone. And biologically, it feels very threatening because we are more likely to not survive on our own. And it turns out that that's really not usually what happens. If we do figure out how to stand up for who we are, for what we want, we end up having better relationships and more authentic relationships. And Caitlyn Jenner, what are we afraid of? We're afraid of losing the love, approval, and appreciation of everyone, society, family, friends, to do what he did to become the person that he thought he really was. He risked everything and became the person that he is today, or she is today. Anxiety is such a key aspect of setting boundaries and becoming differentiated. We worry about what people think of us. Will I lose my status in society? Will I have any friends? Will they be talking about me behind my back? And who will be my people, my tribe? Who am I going to hang out with? Is there going to be anybody left that wants to hang out with me? It is actually a hero's journey. If any of you are familiar with Joseph Campbell, it's not a small thing to stand up for ourselves. It takes a lot of courage. And how do we conquer anxiety? We sort of override the biological survival instinct by using higher order cognitive functions. We use the frontal lobe to look at the emotional content that's running the anxiety that keeps the behavior going. So the anxiety inquiry asks, what's the worst that will happen if you, for example, say no to something, or if you stand up for yourself? We can ask, what's the best that will happen? We try to see where is the actual threat and who is actually being threatened. And it's very interesting to see what happens in our mind when we start asking these questions, and it all gets sort of untangled and seen for what it is. And it sort of falls apart, like it can't hang together when we really look at it, that it's a construct in our minds. So when you're setting boundaries for the first time, people are not going to like it. I have to warn you about that. That if they're used to you being a yes person and doing everything that they've wanted you to do, they're not going to be happy campers when they hear the word no. And so it's another moment in this differentiation process that takes a lot of courage for you to stand in your conviction of why you said no in the first place, because you are going to be greeted with a firestorm. So it's really good to practice and role play. Most of the things you imagine won't happen, but it's still good to be prepared because probably something will happen, and whatever practice that you have will help you be better when that moment comes. And when you're clear about your boundaries, everything changes. You move from being a victim to being empowered. People don't get to do things to you anymore that they've gotten away with for years. You won't be harassed the way you used to be. Even though it takes a lot of courage, you really have nothing to lose but your pain and suffering.